let's go ahead and grab our size 9 circular 16-inch needles and our 2 different colors of our worsted weight yarn. You want to use the darker color as your main color, and that's what we will use here to cast on the number of stitches we want. We will be using the long tail cast on because I find it to be a very versatile cast on, but you can choose any cast on you wish that looks good with a 1x1 rib. We will begin with a slip knot directly onto our needle. Now we will be working in the round. So at this point, this slip knot is going to count as a stitch. And let's go ahead and work our long tail. We have the tail of our yarn over here towards my left, working yarn towards my right. I'm going to take my left hand and put the tail over my thumb, working yarn over my finger. You can see it kind of looks like a slingshot. Now we take our needle, start at the palm of our hand, right down here at the base of our thumb, go up our thumb, swivel to the tip of our finger, go down the finger. You can see there's a window right there. We're going to swing our needle right through that window and then let that yarn fall off our thumb. Give it a tug. Now we've just created a second stitch. Adjust your tension so that you're back in a slingshot, and we'll do it again. Up the thumb, down the finger, through the window, off the thumb. Adjust tension, up the thumb, down the finger, through the window, off the thumb. Up the thumb, down the finger, through the window, off the thumb. Up the thumb, down the finger, through the window, off the thumb. You will continue doing this until you get the number of stitches on your needle for the size you are making. I am going to caution you if you're thinking about making the large size. That is 100% purely for people who have an abnormally large head. For the most of society, if you're making an adult size, the adult medium or the adult average is the size you will want to make. So go ahead and cast on the number of stitches for that size. Once you get all of your stitches cast on, you want to make sure that none of the stitches are twisted. And that is one of the reasons I like the long tail cast on. You get this nice ridge at the base of the stitch that really helps you identify if anything is twisted abnormally around your needle. You can see I have the ridge more towards the inside of my needles. Now I'm going to place the needle that has the tail on it and the working yarn attached in my right hand, and the spare needle, the one that's at the other end, is going to go into my left hand. And I will position all of these stitches, making sure none of them are twisted, down along the left needle and working right around the cord. And I'm saying this in case you've never worked with circulars before. It's at this point in time, we want to get a stitch marker and place it onto your right hand needle. And that's going to identify the start of your round. Now, we will not be working with our tail anymore, so you want to move your tail aside. If it's really long, you can go ahead and cut your tail, leaving at least 4 to 6 inches, so you can weave that in, but that'll help you make it so that you don't accidentally knit with it. Now, whether you're holding your yarn with your right hand or your left hand, the motion is the same. We're going to hold our needles just like this, and we don't have to do anything special to join. We're simply going to start knitting. So we will begin by knitting 1 stitch and getting that started. Okay, so we've knit 1 stitch. We're going to continue on with a 1x1 ribbing. So we will purl the next stitch. Bring your yarn between the needles to the front and purl the next stitch. Bring your yarn between the needles to the back and knit the next stitch. Between the needles to the front and purl. Between the needles to the back and knit. As I'm doing this, my new stitches are gradually getting placed on the right hand needle, and I am gradually moving these stitches over here that need to be worked up towards the left hand needle. Let me show you how to do that with the yarn in the opposite hand. My next stitch needs to be a purl, so I'm going to go between my needles to the front, go into the stitch, go over top of my needle, and purl it. Bring my yarn to the back, between my needles, and knit the next stitch. Bring my yarn to the front, between my needles, and purl the next stitch. Bring my yarn between my needles to the back, and knit. Between my needles to the front, and purl. Between my needles to the back, and knit. Between my needles to the front, and purl. Now, I want to mention something here because sometimes your purls can be a little bit looser than your knits. So after you purl and you bring your yarn back to the back, give it a little tug just to pull up any extra slack that was made using the yarn in that purl. Now we will knit one. Bring our yarn between the needles to the front. Purl one. And then bring the yarn between the needles to the back and give it a little tug. Okay? If you do that, every time after you do that purl stitch, you'll get a nice, clean, snug purl stitch. You can do the same if your yarn is in your right hand. Just gradually maneuver your yarn around, make sure nothing's twisted. So knit, purl, bring my yarn back, give it a little tug. Knit, purl, bring my yarn back, give it a little tug. Knit, purl, bring my yarn back, give it a little tug. You're going to continue knitting one, purling one, all the way back until we get back to where this marker is. As you come up to the end, because we began with a knit, we should end with a purl. And I want to point out, when you get done here, it might look a little stretched out. Okay, that's totally fine. You can take this tail and you can pull it a little bit. And when we transfer the marker over to the right hand needle, you might have a little bit of a gap here. That's totally fine. We can use this tail to seam up any gap that we have later on. And as you get going, that gap will gradually close. We want to continue doing this knit one, purl one ribbing. So we continue on. After you slip your marker, you're going to go ahead and you will knit your knits and purl your purls. So as you are going along, you will knit the knits, purl the purls, meaning if you are looking at a purl, you will purl it. If you're looking at a knit, you will knit it. And how can you tell? On my left-hand needle, if I can see that little bar right there underneath my needle, that means that stitch is a purl, and I'm going to purl it. If there is no bar and it just looks like a V, that's going to be a knit, and I'm going to knit it. So I will continue on working this knit one, purl one ribbing in the round, just like so, until this piece of my project measures the distance written in the pattern. It's at this point in time you can decide if you want to make this a single width or a folded over double width. So it all depends on how big you want this portion of your project to be. You can choose either one. Just pick one and go with it. But the main point here is just keep making your knit one, purl one rib in the round, keeping your stitches consistent and nice, and make sure that you are getting this ribbing, right? You should start to see a column of knits and a column of purls as you work around, okay? Keep working this out until we get to the next play. Hello and welcome back to Game Day Play number 2. By this point, you should have a nice, significant amount of ribbing complete, and it's time to move on to the body. We will start the body with our color A and just knitting 2 rounds. So we will go ahead and continue in the round just like we've been doing before, only this time we will only be knitting. If you've never worked with circular needles before, something I do want to point out is your work should be flowing down the needles just like so, and you should be looking at the outside of your work. If you happen to be looking at your work like this, where this would be the inside of your work, you're inside out. You want to make sure that your ribbing or the right side of your work is out here. So as you knit, you should be looking at knit stitches. So let's go ahead and we will knit 2 rounds with color A to begin with. Once you have completed 2 rounds, it is time for us to change colors. So what we will be doing is following along with this particular chart. You will notice that on the very first row, it says 0. That's because those symbols with the A and the B only indicate what color you will be using for those rounds. We've already completed rounds 1 and 2, so we're going to continue on with rounds 3 and 4. For round 3, we will drop our color A and pick up our color B. I'm using this really lovely blue color for my color B. So I just drop my color A, pick up my color B, and I will continue working round 3 with my color B. Now, if we follow along with the chart, we can see I'm supposed to knit the first 3 stitches. So I will knit 1, 2, and 3. Now we have a symbol that looks like a V. That V indicates I'm supposed to slip this stitch with this yarn in back. So I will go into this stitch as if to purl and slip it off of my left-hand needle, and my yarn is in back. I'm going to do that one more time because I have 2 of those side by side. So I slip with my yarn in back. Now I go and I knit 1 stitch. One thing you want to be careful of is this float right there that's behind these 2 slipped stitches. You don't want it to be too tight, okay? You want it to be about the same distance from where your color B was used before to where it is now. Like it would just be a very comfortable, relaxed distance. It should not look like this, where it's super tight, okay? It should not look like that. It should be a nice, relaxed distance so that you have a little bit of give. So I knit 1. And then I have to slip 2 more. So I slip as if to purl, slip as if to purl with my yarn in back. Now I go ahead and I knit 2 stitches, 1 and 2. Again, when I have my float go behind these 2 stitches, I make sure that it's nice and relaxed. Okay, that is the end of 1 stitch pattern repeat. So if you want to keep track of your repeats, you could use a marker and place a marker after every 10 stitches. So that way you know where you are on your chart. So I will go ahead and knit 3 stitches because this is the start of my chart again. Knit 3, slip 1, slip 2. Both of those, my yarn is in back. Knit 1, slip 1, slip 2, knit 2, knit 1, knit 2. And then I can go ahead, grab another marker, and place it there. You do not have to mark every 10th stitch. It's completely up to you. But if you're somebody who likes to keep track of your stitches as they're worked in repeats to make sure you don't make a mistake, these markers can be very helpful. Slip, slip, knit 1, slip, slip, knit 2. Okay, and again, I'm just following along with that chart and place another marker. Now I'm going to place my yarn in my other hand, just so those of you who like to hold your yarn over here, you can see how it's worked. We're going to work 3 stitches. Slip 2, slip 1, slip 2, knit 1. Again, I made sure that my float is not very tight. Slip 1, slip 2, knit 1, knit 2. Then I can place a marker. Okay. See that? I'm going to do that again. Knit 1, knit 2, knit 3, slip 1, slip 2, knit 1, slip 1, slip 2, knit 2, knit 1, knit 2. It's the end of the repeat. Grab another marker. And you keep doing this until you get back to the start. Now, one thing I didn't pay attention to as I was just grabbing my markers is I'm kind of grabbing markers that are all the same. And I want to make sure I can quickly identify the start of my round, right? So when I get back to the start of my round, I'm actually going to change my marker to make sure it looks different than all the others so that I can quickly identify that that one is the start of my round, right? Because right now I'm just putting all these really very simple markers. If you want to learn how to make markers like this, you can watch some of the videos I have here in the MVP package, or if you're looking on YouTube, you can watch all of those over on YouTube. You can see here, it gets very easy. You start to really kind of get a good flow, you know. And I end with my knit 2, knit 1, and knit 2. Now this last stitch is going to be loose there, right? Because it's not being held down by anything. That's the yarn, right? And then this is the start of my round. This is where I said, see, all of my markers look the same. So I'm going to change my marker out. Let's grab, decisions. I have all these markers that are crochet related. Okay, so I'm going to grab this marker so I know that that is the start of my round. Now I'm ready to go on to the next round. I am still not going to use my color A. I'm still using my color B, right? You can see up there on round 4, I'm still showing my color B as used on this round. But now I have those dash marks in the boxes. That indicates I'm going to be purling these stitches now instead of knitting. So I'm going to bring my yarn forward between my needles and I will purl 3 stitches, bring my yarn back and slip those 2 stitches again, bring my yarn forward between my needles and purl, bring my yarn back and slip, bring my yarn forward and purl. Okay, this is going to give us a combination of stockinette with our color A and garter stitch with our color B. Okay, if you do not like doing these purls and you want to keep those as knits, you can do that, but it will change the look of your project. Whatever you decide to do, just be consistent with it. So the great thing about doing the second round when you're on the same color is you can quickly see which ones you're supposed to purl because they're the same color as the yarn you're using, right? So I don't have to worry too much about counting as long as I've done all of the stitches correctly the first time around. So here we go. Let's keep up the pace here. Slip, make sure you're slipping those with the yarn and back. Okay, yarn and back. And when you're moving the yarn from the front to the back, make sure you go between your needles, okay? Always go between your needles. Otherwise, you could accidentally get a yarn over, and we do not want that. So move your yarn between your needles. Slip, slip between my needles so I can purl, between my needles so I can slip, slip, between my needles so I can purl these last 2. Okay. Let's put the yarn in my other hand here. Now, I don't purl very easily with this hand, so please bear with me. So I'm going to purl 3. 1, 2, 3. Bring my yarn between my needles to the back. Slip, slip. Bring my yarn between my needles back to the front. Purl. Between my needles to the back. Slip, slip. Between my needles to the front. Purl and purl. Slip my marker. I kind of move my marker back to the back so it's out of the way. My yarn is still in front, which is where I want it to be because I need to purl these 3. Bring my yarn to the back. Slip, slip. Every time I'm going from the front to the back, I go between my needles. Between my needles. Slip, slip. Between my needles. Purl and purl. Between my needles, back to the back. I'm going to switch hands again here. I'm just going to keep going until I get to the end of my round. Oops. Purl and purl. And I'm back to the start of my round. So I slip my marker over, and you can see rounds 5 and 6, I will be using my color A again. So I will drop my color B, pick up my color A. I did not cut it, so I'm picking it up from a couple rows below. Just drop my color A, and then I continue on with my color, dropped my color B, pick up my color A, and I continue on with my color A. Okay? And you can see there, it's just knitting 2 rounds. So we're back to just knitting 2 rounds. And we knit all of these stitches. We are not going to slip any stitches. We are just knitting. So anytime you're on rounds 1 and 2 or 5 and 6, you are simply knitting with color A. So they're very easy, sort of relief type rounds, okay? The big action rounds where things, get slipped or you're knitting or you're purling, those are really rounds 3 and 4 or 7 and 8. One thing that you will notice as you carry on to row 7 or round 7 is that you are still knitting stitches, slipping stitches inside of that 10 stitch repeat where our markers are, but you are knitting and slipping different stitches, different columns of stitches. So what it will do is it will stagger the stitch pattern that we are creating with those garter stitches in our color B. So let me get all the way around. I'm going to try and knit both rounds relatively quickly here so I can show you how all of this works up. If you do not like carrying up your color and you want to cut your yarn each time, you can do that. I do not recommend doing that. You can absolutely carry up your color from around 2 rounds below up to where you're going to use it again. I think you absolutely are fine doing that. I think the hardest part when you're doing that is just the yarn management. So you want to make sure that your color A and B are not getting tangled too much. You absolutely could cross one color over the other each time. Like if you put your whatever the color you were using, make it go across across the new color you're using to kind of lock them in place, just as you would if you were doing intarsia. I like to do that personally, so I definitely recommend doing that. It just makes the join at that point there nice on the inside, and you don't get a hole. So here I am. I'm at the end. Slip my marker. Make sure everything looks good. Everything looks good. And I will knit one more round. You can see I'm just slipping, and I shouldn't say slipping. I'm just moving all of my stitches around this circular needle as I need them to come up on the left. I push them up on the left needle and I tug them down on the right and keep them going. And I do knit continental style where I hold the yarn in my left hand, but the motion is the same. Like I'm still going into the stitch the exact same way as you would if you were continental and knitting those stitches. So I go in, around, and out. I just tend to knit faster this way because it's my go-to method since I was a crocheter before I became a knitter and became by Crafty. It's very similar to how I hold my crochet hook and yarn. Let's keep it coming here. These stitches should remain the size of your needle as you're knitting. Each of those stitches as they're getting made should be the same size as your needle. If you find that you're making them too tight, something to pay attention to is as you knit, make sure you have the resting yarn like it's coming down from the needle a little bit. You're pulling it down instead of pulling it up. Do not pull it up to where that height takes that stitch beneath and kind of pulls it up. You don't want that. You want to pull it down. And that will help you get your stitches to be the correct size if you find you're getting a little bit too snug. And that goes for continental and English. Same process. You want to make sure that your stitches are the same size as your needle. I don't know if you guys can hear my dogs. I'm really sorry. They just decided they're going to bark. Almost to the end of my round here. And what I will do is I will end up dropping my color A that I'm using right now. I will pick up my color B and continue on to round 7. And then round 8 would be my purl round with all of those stitches. All right, so I slip my marker. This is what I mean about dropping. So I would drop my new color and have it cross over the old. I'm sorry, let me rephrase this. Take the color I just finished. This is my old color. And I have it cross over my new color. See how there's like that crossover right there? So that when I pick this up, the colors they're like cinched together and I don't get a hole. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So we are on round 7. So you can see that very first stitch is a knit. So we knit it. And then we immediately jump into slipping 2 stitches. Then we knit 5 stitches. Okay. So knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slip 1, slip 2, slip our marker, then we're at the start. So knit 1, slip 1, slip 2, knit 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slip 1, slip 2. It's the end of our repeat. Slip our marker. Knit 1, slip 1, slip 2, knit 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slip 1, slip 2. That's the end of our repeat. Slip your marker. See how this is going? Knit 1, slip 1, slip 2, knit 5. And then we'd slip these two. I want you to see what we're doing here. We are positioning that one stitch right there that's between the slip stitches. We are now moving it so that it's right between those 5 stitches there. Can you see it? It's right there. And then this one here, we now have the 5 stitches on top of that. So it's almost like we're going to create a checkerboard with these garter stitch sections with those slip stitches. Okay. So your color B, like I said, you want your darker color to be your color A. Your color B should absolutely be like this pop of color that's coming off of the fabric. And mine is definitely like 2 different colors, right? It's definitely the green and the blue. You could have one that's a little bit more melded together, a little bit more the same if you wanted to. It's just going to hide all of this work. But overall, this is the look we're going for. You would continue working around with round 7 and then round 8, just like we did down here. Every time you come across your color B, you would end up purling it and you still would slip your color A. So at the end, you get a look that's similar to this. Can you see that? So we're going to have the 5 garter stitch sections right there on top of the 1 section, and it just continues on and you get this kind of a look. All right, so that's what we're going for. So for this play, what I want you to do is I want you to carry on working through that chart for the number of times listed in this section, and then join me back here and we will carry on to the next big section that you need the video for. All right, so let's go ahead and go. Good luck, everybody. Hello and welcome back to Game Day 2025. By this point, your project should look a little something like this. You've completed the ribbing, whether you did a single distance or you've doubled it over, and you've completed the body of your project. It's at this point you should be able to measure your project to make sure it measures the distance written in the pattern. You will be measuring from the bottom of the ribbing. So if you made the fold over ribbing, make sure you have it folded over and you're measuring from the bottom of that. It's at this point we can go ahead and we can cut off our color B, making sure you leave a nice long tail so we can weave that in. Now, by this point, you've probably guessed what it is we're making. So what we will do now is we will decrease the number of stitches we have right here on our circular needles. And when they get too tight on our circulars, that's when we will transfer over to our double points. So right now, let me go ahead and I will remove my needle protectors and I will begin. Now, I did finish after a round 2. So I finished after 2 rounds of my color A. So whether that's on a round 2 or a round 6, that's totally up to you. We're going to continue on now. And on this round, we will decrease with a knit 2 together every single stitch around. So these are the first 2 stitches. We'll go into the second one on the left-hand needle and through the first one, through the front leg, and knit them together. Let me get this a little bit closer for you. That's better. Now we go to the next stitch. These are the 2 stitches. Go into the second stitch through the front leg and the first stitch through the front leg and knit them together. Okay? We're going to do this all the way around. One thing you will notice that I do, once I pull them off and I now have the 1 stitch on my right, I pull my fabric down just to have the 2 stitches really fall into place and make sure they're nice and neat on my project. I will keep working these knit 2 togethers all the way around. As you come to the end of the round, you should end with a knit 2 together. Every single size of this pattern had an even number of stitches before we started this round. Now, after this round, you might have an odd number of stitches or an even number, and that will be important when we decrease yet again. Now on this round, we are just going to knit. Now at this point, my stitches are still loose enough to fit around my circular needles, but maybe your size is not. So let me go ahead and grab my double points, and we're going to transfer to double points right now. Okay, so I have my size 9 double pointed needles here. I'm going to go ahead and grab all of these out. And yes, I'm going to use all 5 of these. I find it easier to work with 5 double points versus 4. Now, this next round we will be doing is just a knit round. That's why I want to transfer to my double points now. It becomes a lot easier to transfer them over on a knit round instead of trying to remember knit 2 togethers. So let's go ahead and we will knit this entire round. And depending on the number of stitches you have, you could divide that by 4 so you know exactly how many stitches you want on each needle, or you can just eyeball it. That's totally fine. So I'm just going to eyeball it here and work around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think 10 is good. So I'll just stop there. Notice I drop my needle. I still have tension on my yarn here, whether it's in your left hand or your right hand. Grab your next needle. Notice, so this is the other end of my circular, right? It's just hanging out over there. We want to knit off of our left onto our double point. So right here, I'm going to go into my stitch off my left, yarn over with the yarn that's attached to the last stitch of my double point there, and then come off. Give this a good tug. So it should look like the last stitch on this double point is butted up right next to the last stitch on this double point. So now this one is nice and snug, and we want to knit the next stitch now as its partner, and we want to keep it nice and snug. So I'll knit the next stitch and give it a nice tug. Now what that does is this stitch being tight locks in this one, and this stitch being tight locks in the join between these two. So I can actually shake my needles and they're not going to fall out. Okay? At this point, I can just carry on and knit as normal. All right, so I'm going to put 10 on that one. All right, you can see here, my stitches are getting really snug around here, right? So all I'm going to do is my needle over here that I've just kind of let hang out there because I'm replacing it with one of these, just kind of give it a pull so that the stitches line up down there. And this is going to go away eventually, okay? This is going to go away. So now we grab our new needle and we repeat the process. So I'm going to go into the stitch on my left-hand needle of my circular, yarn over with my yarn, and jump off and give that a tug. So now that stitch is super snug to that stitch. And now we need to make this stitch its partner. So we'll go into that one and knit it, give it a nice tug, and everything is secure now. Okay. So now we just knit as normal. Notice after I get done, I like to put the stitches just like in the middle of my double points. And because I've knit those stitches nice and snug at the start, they're not going to go anywhere. They're not going to fall out. I don't have to worry about putting, point protectors on there or anything. They're going to be just fine. All right, we're at our last stitch here. Okay. So, or not our last stitch, our last stitches. So I grab my next needle, do the exact same thing again, give it a nice tug, and then the second one, give it a nice tug. So everything is nice and snug. And then I will finish off my stitches. All right. Okay, it is at this point, all of the stitches that were remaining are divided evenly for my size. It could be almost evenly, as even as possible for your size, but they're divided on 4 different double points. Now, don't let this scare you. All we've really done is we have replaced the cord here of our circular with actual needles. So if this needle is going to take the place of this needle, and this needle would take the place of this one. That's the first one I'm going to start knitting off of. That means that needle replaces that cord, that needle replaces that cord, that needle replaces this cord, and then this is my spare needle. So we're still going to work in the round. It's just instead of having a nice smooth cord joining everything, we have actual join points between the needles. And if you keep those join points nice and snug, just as I told you, you will not get any ladders, your needles won't fall out, everything's going to be okay. Now, I understand if you've never done this before, this can be scary and it can be a little bit daunting. Hopefully, you'll give it a try and just kind of go with blind faith. But if you want to add a lifeline at this point, you absolutely could do that. To add a lifeline, you can go ahead, you could grab your other color and cut off some of your other color. Take your tapestry needle. And at this point, without taking the stitches off, just thread your tapestry needle through all the stitches that are on your needle. Okay? You could do this now. You could do this before you put everything on the double points. You could do it whenever you want. But essentially, you would put all of these all the way around, and you are adding a lifeline or a safety net so that if a stitch should drop off, or maybe you mess up and you want to go back to the start, all of these stitches now are on this blue string. And so they aren't going to fall anywhere. They aren't going to go anywhere. So you could continue putting your lifeline in all of the way around. Now, I know some of you probably have had a lifeline in since the beginning with all of the stitches, and that's fine. You can have as many lifelines in your project as you want. There is, why am I taking them off? There is nothing to say that, you don't, or that you can't have more than one lifeline, okay? Got eager and I started taking them off. I don't want to take them off. I want to just thread them through. And you want to be careful. You don't thread through any of your stitch markers. Notice I've removed all of my stitch markers that were separating all of my repeats. You do not want to thread your lifeline through any stitch markers, okay? Because then the stitch marker won't be able to move. You just want to thread it through your actual stitch that's on the needle. Try not to split the yarn of that stitch, and just kind of keep going around. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to finish this so that way you guys can see how this would look. And I'm doing this mainly because I know there's quite a few beginners on here who are terrified of the double points, and I don't want you to be terrified. Honestly, they look scarier than they are, and if you really do the suggestions I make of making those stitches tight, you won't have any problem with your double points. They are not that difficult to do. But if you are familiar with Magic Loop and you want to give that a try, you're more than welcome to do that as well. Totally fine. I just prefer to use double points because I find them really easy and I don't have to fuss with moving stitches back and forth like I do with a Magic Loop. So I'm on the last needle here. I'm going to go through all of these. And I am making sure that my stitches aren't falling off my needle as I do this. Just going underneath all of those stitches that are resting on my needle. Okay, that's all I'm doing. They're going through the stitches that are resting on my needle, putting a lifeline in. And like I said, you could put this in before you go to double points. You could put it in after you go to double points like this. You could put a lifeline in whenever you want. But this is essentially what it is. It is a safety net. And once I get my lifeline in, what I like to do is I will take the end of my lifeline and just tie it. So that way I don't accidentally pull it out. So now there's a knot, so it's not going to go anywhere. And then I just ignore it because now we don't want anything to do with it anymore. It's just hanging out there as a safety net in case something messes up. Okay. Now we continue on to our next round of decrease. If you have an odd number of stitches right now, you'll notice that you need to knit 1 stitch and then you go on to knit 2 together all the way around. If you have an even number of stitches, you will be just knitting 2 together all the way around, which is exactly what I have. I have 40 stitches remaining, so I'm just going to knit 2 together all the way around. And we're going to do the exact same thing that we did when we knit off of the circular onto the double points. So my yarn is coming from this needle here. This is the needle I'm knitting off of. This is the needle I'm knitting onto. So I go into that stitch. Do not grab your lifeline. Just let the lifeline hang out there. Just ignore it. Yarn over your right hand needle and pull out just like you normally would. And then give that a tug. It's right there that we want to make sure that that stitch there is nice and snug next to that stitch there. And then we want to make sure the partner is nice and stitched, right? So you're going to pull it close like that. Now remember, we're going to be doing a knit 2 together. So this first one, we're going to knit 2 together and then give it a tug, right? And then the next one, I'm going to knit 2 together because I have an even number of stitches. So I'm jumping right into my knit 2 togethers. I pulled both of those finished stitches nice and snug, and my needle will not go anywhere. It's not going to go anywhere. And then I just continue on, just as I normally would. So I'm going to knit 2 together all the way down my needle. And if for some reason, say 1 stitch was here and the next stitch was over here when I needed to do a knit 2 together, I will just move 1 stitch over to the next needle. So whether I would move the stitch over here to over there or over there to over here, whatever you need to do just to complete that knit 2 together. Okay. All right. So here we are. We're at the next one. Yarn's coming from here. I'm knitting off of here. So I'm going to knit these 2 together. When I pop them off, I give it a nice pull, right? My resulting stitch right there, I want it nice and snug next to there. Got to make sure its partner is nice and snug as well. And then you're good. Now we just go just like normal. You don't have to do anything special. We're just going to knit 2 together. Once those first 2 are nice and snug, you don't have to worry about the rest of them. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, isn't that going to make that column of stitches bad because they're going to be tighter than the rest? No, because the stitches naturally start to relax and to be all the same size. By the time I get back around, these first 2 stitches that I had knit nice and snug, they are back to the normal knit size, I guess, whatever you want to call it. And so I don't have to worry about them. They're all ready to go. So knitting these first 2 stitches really just secures the needle next to this needle, and it makes these 2 stitches here nice and snug together because we don't want the yarn that's between these 2 stitches. That's what creates your ladder, and we don't want that to be loose. We want that to be snug. So here we go again. Let's do another knit 2 together, nice and snug, and then we'll finish. By this point, if you're new to double points, you might be thinking, well, how do I know if I'm back at the start? Well, it'll be convenient right now because you'll be back at the start when you're back to the needle that has half the number of stitches, right? You'll be back to the needle that has half the number of stitches. So you'll be able to tell, but you could always use a marker to mark your fabric on where the start of your round is. Again, just a reminder, completely ignore your lifeline, completely ignore it. I'm going to do my knit 2 together, give a nice snug tug, do the next knit 2 together, snug tug, and then just finish as normal. Knit 2. It looks like my lifeline is in the way, so I'm just going to move it. So it's still between all those stitches. I just don't want to knit into it. So I just moved it out of the way. Down to my last 2 stitches. And again, I know I'm at the start of my round because I'm at 5 stitches here. You got that? All right, by this point, we are down to a good number of stitches to bring this whole thing together. But I like to complete these knit two togethers with one more round of knit. So on this final round, let's just do one more round of knitting. So I'm not doing knit two togethers. I'm just going to knit these stitches. Make sure they're nice and snug. So that way on the next part, I can complete the top of my project. If you wanted to do another round of decreases after you do this knit round, you could do that. It won't, make or break your project, but I did not do that because I did not find that necessary for this project at the measurements that I've given you, so that way it will actually fit. Here we go. To my last needle here. And you'll notice, hopefully you've noticed, I've made sure all of those are nice and snug, and the second one's snug, and then I keep going. All right. And back to the start. How do I know that? Well, here's my lifeline. It's right there, right? So I use that as my marker. At this point, we are going to cut our color A, but we want to leave ourselves a nice long tail that we can thread through all of these and pull snug like a drawstring and pull the crown of this project all together. So it's better to err on the side of having too much yarn than not enough. So you have plenty of yarn. You should be able to go ahead and cut yourself a nice long length of yarn and thread it onto your tapestry needle. Now, this time, unlike what we did down here with our lifeline where we went through all of the stitches as if to purl, this time I want you to go through each individual stitch as if to knit and then take it off. So we're going to go into as if to knit and then take it off. As if to knit and take it off. As if to knit, take it off. As if to knit, take it off. As if to knit, take it off. Your needle will be empty. Set that aside. Pull your tail through. It's going to get caught there. Pull your tail through all those live stitches. We go to the next needle. Notice I'm always turning like this, right? I'm always turning like I finish my needle and I turn. If this is 12 o'clock, I'm turning it counterclockwise. I go in as if to knit, take it off. Into 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 knit, take it off. Set the needle aside. Pull my tapestry needle through all of those stitches. Go to the next. Knit, take it off. 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 Pull through. Now you could, take it off and pull through immediately. Like you could take it off and pull through. That's fine too. It just takes a little bit longer, but you could do that. It's totally fine. Notice I still have my lifeline in place, right? No need to take it out yet. We don't need to take it out yet. But at this point, all of the stitches that we had on our needles are now secured with the tail. So what we will do now, and especially because I'm using a strong acrylic yarn, I can pull this really nice and snug to close this up. If you happen to be using a yarn that if you pull it tight, it's going to break, I would suggest threading like a cotton yarn through here so you could pull and pull it closed and then maybe add a pom-pom on the top. You do whichever you want to do. But this yarn is strong enough to pull through. So what I'm going to do, this is just like my favorite part. I feel like it's magic, but I just pull the tail of the yarn and you can see it just closes up that hole. It closes it up. All nice and neat. And then all I need to do now is I'm going to take my tapestry needle and I kind of weave it through all of these again, just to kind of give it a little pull. This is not enough to secure the whole thing, just FYI, but I do like to pull these together just with one more pull through. Give it a nice tug again, and then I will take my needle and stick it down the center, turn this inside out, and pull the thread through. Now at this point, the top of your project should be closed. And now you will use your tail to really seam this all closed. So you don't want to just go in a circle at this point. You want to seam it closed. So I went up there. Let's come back down here, and I'm threading through the stitches. I have my finger over here to make sure that the needle is not coming through. I'm going through the stitches, and I am weaving in my tail nice and snug, just to keep this together, because you don't want the top of your project to come apart, right? You don't want it to come apart. So if you take the time to put all this together, it will look good, okay? It's not going to come apart. And no need to put a knot in there. Imagine wearing this on your head and you have a knot that's constantly pushing at the top of your head. You don't want that. Like, I don't want that. Just if you do it secure like this, you'll be able to tell, like, that is not coming undone. All right, so that is nice and secure. I can snip my yarn. And then at this point, I can look at the top of my project, right? It looks really nice and neat there. I can go ahead and remove my lifeline. So I just cut my lifeline. And sort of the same deal. You can see the lifeline right here. I'm just going to pull it out of all those stitches. And as long as we didn't drop a stitch or anything along the way, everything should be nice and neat. Look at that. It looks good, right? So anybody guess what it is so far? You probably have. So at this point, turn it inside out. Your inside looks a little something like this. Depending if you had to cut your yarn or not, that'll determine how many ends you have to weave in, but you'll just take these ends and you'll weave them into your project. And because I know that that is very important, I want to make sure I show you how to do that. It's not super hard. It's very similar to what we just did on the top, but you're going to thread your tail. This is why we left a 4 to 6 inch long tail. And we know that we can follow along the path of this blue stitch here and weave in our tail. So I know that if I come up, I come behind these and I come down here, then it comes all the way over here, right? So I can come all the way over here, come up, go behind those, come down here. I can come all the way across, go up, go behind, and I have to go behind, like I'm following the stitch here. And then I come down. I went across a pretty good amount there, right? That's a pretty good amount. At this point, I would actually thread my needle. So I have a tapestry needle here, but if you have a chenille needle, it's even better. I'm threading it actually like through the fibers of the floats and the yarn I just floated across. And I'm just kind of locking the tail that I have in place in those fibers. Cut it, and then that is nice and secure. So I would do the same thing right here. I had a knot in my yarn, so I had to cut it. And then I would do the same thing up here where I finished off with my color B. Now, down here at the bottom, if you remember, I told you not to worry about this coming loose when you were doing your ribbing. So it's at this point you'll use your tail, thread it onto your needle. Look at it this way. And if you come over, you can work your way and close any sort of opening that you see here and make it nice and neat. And then you can sort of wrap your tail around. These would be the knits on the inside. If you made a double brim, you want to make sure you're weaving your tail in on the portion of your project that is not going to be the public side, because this project is not getting folded at the brim here. I'm definitely on the wrong side of my work. Weaving in my end, weaving in my tail. It is nice and secure. It doesn't add a whole bunch of bulk. Let's take a peek. Okay, so here we are. This is your finished project. Obviously, by now, you know it is a hat. Whether you did a double brim or a single brim, this should measure the distance that we wrote in the pattern. It's at this point you can decide whether you want to add a pom-pom or not. Now, obviously, the finish that we did looks nice enough that you do not need a pom-pom, but if you want to add a pom-pom, this is when you'd want to do it. And then, of course, if you want to add any sort of labeling down here, this is when you could do it as well. So let me bring in one that I made before. So this is the double brim. Here is the label I was talking about. And then, of course, up here, we have a pom-pom attached. And I did use the technique that I always use of having a very big button. And then I thread this Bernat Maker yarn through my pom-pom. And then when I pull it through here, I just tie a bow and it keeps the pom-pom very secure to my project. See, it's not flimsy and it just looks nice and neat. So here is the single brim, here is the double brim, here is without a pom-pom, here is with a pom-pom. And that, ladies and gentlemen, completes your game day. Hopefully you enjoyed this project. I know I did. I really want to add my label now, so I'm going to do that. And I'm going to go check my stash for a pom-pom because I am a sucker for pom-poms. Anyways, I am so glad you guys joined me. I hope you enjoyed this and make sure you share with us on social media. Bye, guys.